All right, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Those of you in attendance, thank you for being here. Board members, it is delightful to see you and the entire team, Commissioner Glass, all of your folks staying put in Frankfurt this time. So we're happy to be here. And Dr. Brewer, if you would, please call roll.
Joanne Adams.
Here.
Jamie Boland.
Here.
Patrice McCrary.
Here.
Randy Hope.
Here.
Sharon Robinson.
Here.
Lee Todd.
Here.
Steve Trimble.
Here.
Lou Young.
Here.
Joanna Stevens.
Here.
Jude Ayla.
Here.
Amanda Ellis here for Dr. Costa. Case here, you do have a report.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brewer. And Lieutenant Governor Coleman does plan to join us virtually to give the report on behalf of the cabinet. So we'll keep our eye out for her on the screen. If I miss her, Dr. Brewer, if you would, please let us know. So we'll jump right into the agenda. And the first item under internal board business is the minutes of the October 11 regular meeting, October 12 regular meeting, October 11 operations committee, October 11 curriculum instruction and assessment committee, and December 1st awards committee meetings. You received all of those in advance in the portal, but at this time I would entertain any corrections or additions to the minute as you see fit.
Approval.
Thank you so much. On a motion from Dr. Todd, do we have a second?
Second.
And for Mr. Trimble, thank you so much. And we do not need the roll call vote. So all of those in favor of approving the minutes as sent, please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. And hello, Ms. McCrary. So glad you're feeling at least well enough to join us via Zoom today. Can you hear us?
Thank goodness for technology.
That's right. And you can hear well.
Yes.
Excellent. So I'm turning it over to our chair of the awards committee, Mrs. Patrice McCrary.
We are here to celebrate another award, the Kevin C. Brown Award. Kevin C. Brown served at the Kentucky Department of Education in various roles from 2004 to 2018. Most recently, as we all recall, Brown served as the Interim Commissioner of Education from December 2019 to September 2020. Brown's time at the department throughout 2020 was certainly marked with significant challenges that called for strategic educational leadership and clear ongoing communication that was forward-thinking, action-oriented, and aimed at advancing efforts to educate, feed, and support Kentucky's 650,000 students during a global pandemic. The priority area for this award changes from year to year, and it's based on the desire of the board. This year's priority area is one that is all near and dear to us, the United We Learn. United We Learn is our vision for the future of public education in Kentucky. This vision builds around three big ideas: creating a more vibrant experience for every student, encouraging innovation in our schools, especially when it comes to assessment, and creating a bold new future for Kentucky schools through collaboration with our communities. These three big ideas, students, innovation, and community, form the vision for the future of public education in Kentucky. United We Learn means everyone in our Commonwealth. Everyone in our Commonwealth. Educators, families, students, community members, and business leaders are working together to support our public schools and bringing about deep and authentic learning experiences for all students. Such a worthy goal. The 2022 award seeks to recognize a person, group, organization, district, school, or post-secondary institution who, through policy and practice, makes it a top priority to champion United We Learn. Criteria for the award includes significant contributions and/or other efforts to champion United We Learn and its efforts to support the reimagining of learning in Kentucky by co-creating a vision with communities, fostering local innovation, and advancing policy recommendations aligned with this work. On behalf of the awards committee, I would like to share that the committee met this past Thursday, December 1, and after going over several very excellent applications, determined that candidate 3 best met the criteria of the award. Therefore, I would like to move approval of candidate number 3 as the recipient of the 2022 Kevin C. Brown Strategic Priority Award and ask the chair for the board's approval to recognize candidate number 3 at the board's upcoming February regular meeting.
Ms. Reese, thank you so much. And I think some combination of you and Dr. Brewer were the ones responsible for coming up with this strategic priority, and I absolutely love it. So thank you for that and for the work of the committee. This recommendation does come from the awards committee, therefore does not require a second. But do we have any further discussion before we consider candidate number 3 for the Kevin C. Brown Award? Or discuss the anonymous conversation, isn't it? All right, hearing none, expecting none, all those in favor of the recommendation for candidate 3, please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you so much, and thanks again to the committee, Joanne. We appreciate your support of that work as well. All right, so Lieutenant Governor has been able to join us. I don't know what your time was like. Be happy to yield for your report if that would help your day flow better.
That'd be great.
Okay, thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Been a little bit all over the place today, but I have some good news to report and hopefully some positive discussion about the education first agenda that we unveiled not too long ago. So first, let me say that the Education and Labor Cabinet has established a new career center at Fort Campbell to assist transitioning military personnel who will be entering the civilian workforce. And there are key staff from the cabinet that will discuss the site visit at Fort Campbell to develop further assistance measures and to build a stronger partnership with base leadership. The cabinet, the Education and Labor Cabinet also continues to work with multiple agencies, including our KCTCS system for the Ford Blue Oval SK operation. KCTCS and particularly ECTC in Elizabethtown and the cabinet have an on-site learning and training facility that I think everybody is really excited about to help build that workforce. Yesterday, we actually were in Elizabethtown and Hardin County to do the groundbreaking for the Ford SK Oval, Blue Oval training facility. And so, electric vehicle battery plant, and got to see some of that. Here's more about that training facility and some things that are happening there. So that was a big day. We had lots of international visitors and exciting news, and the person that kicked off the announcement in the day was a teacher from Hardin County. I thought that was fitting, given that for all of the investment and development that's being done to sustain it is going to take certainly a strong partnership between schools, community, and business. So that was great to see. After that, I got to visit the Hardin County Early College and Career Center. They call it the EC3 Center yesterday, and it was just everything that we see and hear about our schools and the innovation that they are really becoming really adept at. There were dual credit college students who were there, which would make President Thompson happy. And there were students who were there in specific pathways and even pathways within pathways, knowing exactly where they're going and where they want to go afterwards, very focused on the opportunities that are going to be available right in their back door before long. And so that was really neat to see. And for those of us who've worked in schools before, it was really obvious to me, even though no one said it out loud, that every set of students I saw was on a different schedule, coming from different home high schools. And just the thought of that kind of made my head spin a little bit, but also it made me really grateful to know that that our schools are building systems that are personalized to their students rather than a one size fits all. And that's what I saw, even though it may not have made sense to someone outside of education. It made perfect sense to me because I just saw that there was so much innovation going on there. So that was a really neat thing. I learned all about automotive and engineering and nursing and all kinds of things. I told the nursing class that we could hire 6,000 nurses tomorrow in the state of Kentucky and break even. So they were going to be in good shape for the next few years. They were very excited to hear that. So just kind of like a little tidbit of what's going on, both economic development and related education across the state of Kentucky. Certainly that's the largest economic development project we've ever had. Yeah. And so to see our community and our school system building up around that is really exciting because it just shows how strong our commitment is to making sure that becomes a sustainable and successful project. I think about the fact that they're hiring 5,000 employees, and the town that I grew up in has 1,000 people, right? Yeah. So they are building one facility that is 5 times the size of my hometown in this tiny little town in Glendale. So that's pretty amazing stuff. So I know everybody's really excited about that. In other news, I haven't seen you all in person since Governor Bashir and I announced our Education First agenda. Some of the items on that will be familiar because it's something that we talk about all the time, but it's something these are the things that we're very committed to. And I think Commissioner Glass, you and Dr. Young were there that day, right? Yeah. Okay. They joined us to unveil that plan as well. And so first on the list, and let me just back up for a second. This Education First agenda was released kind of on the heels of the release of our test scores, several months ago. And we all know how that can be and feel when you're working in a fishbowl, certainly after something like the pandemic that happened. And what we saw was a lot of armchair quarterbacking. Got a lot of those around these issues. And so we wanted to make sure that we weren't pointing fingers. We weren't content, but we rolled up our sleeves and got to work on some issues that would really help to move Kentucky schools forward. So the first is something we put in the budget every single year. We continue to put in the budget every single year until it passes. And that is a 5% raise for any and every school employee. So not just classroom teachers, every adult that works in a school building. Because in my opinion, everybody that works in a school is a teacher. So I get caught up calling them all teachers, but that's what that means to me. And the reason why is we have 11,000 vacancies across the state of Kentucky right now. We fell from 42nd to 44th in the nation in teacher pay, and at a time where we know that the challenges that are in front of us, and we know that teachers and school employees are our front line to help improve education and build a better economy. We've got to pay our teachers better. 5% is not enough, but it is a start to do that. So that's one thing that we proposed. The next proposal is to fund universal pre-K for every 4-year-old in Kentucky. And there are a litany of reasons that we could do that. I could just line Patrice up and let her go on this one probably. But in the immediate, what it does is it helps women return to the workforce who have been really pushed out of it because of COVID and childcare and all the things that kind of fell into the laps of so many working women across the state of Kentucky. But long term, we all know that changes the trajectory of a generation of students for the better. You look at the kindergarten readiness rates that we have in Kentucky and what those numbers are of the kids that walk into kindergarten on level with kindergarten readiness, and then jump to the graduation day of high school and the transition readiness rate. It's pretty similar. It's almost the same. And so what that tells us is once you start behind the eight ball, you stay behind the eight ball. And so we have a lot of opportunity available to students in Kentucky for early childhood education, but it's not enough and it's not available to every child. And so what that means to this girl from a town from 1,000 people is your zip code then determines your future. And we can't let that happen here in Kentucky. So that's something that the governor and I are committed to continue to work through and figure out how to build the infrastructure to ready a workforce. That's not going to happen overnight, but if we don't start putting one foot in front of the other, we're going to be in bad shape very soon. So that's something that we're committed to doing. The governor said we could fund the teacher raises and universal pre-K solely out of if we only did it out of the rainy day fund, we would still have the third largest rainy day fund in Kentucky's history. So the funding is not an issue for the first time in a long time. And so we need to make sure that we're investing in the areas that will provide the greatest return on investment. Next up is textbooks and professional development. I don't need to tell you all this, but somehow we keep having budgets in Kentucky passed that have no funding, that has no funding in them for textbooks, technology, instructional resources that you obviously need to improve reading scores, and all of those things. And so making sure that our schools have what they need is important. Offering a loan forgiveness program to teachers as an incentive to join the profession. So that's kind of a front end incentive. And then of course on the back end, one of the things the governor and I have always been concerned about is the pension system. That is something that our new teachers have been taken out of. And so being able to retain teachers throughout their career, not have turnover every 2 or 3 years is going to be an ongoing problem. And so restoring those pensions and making sure that all educators have the benefit of committing their career to teaching is there. And last but not least, we want to develop, and this would be in conjunction with the Department of Education, 8 regional social emotional learning institutes that would help to train our teachers on how to best care for the whole child. And you all know, out of our office, we worked on the student mental health initiative over the last couple years and had students lead the way in talking to us about what they needed and how we could help in developing policy recommendations and kind of going on a little bit of a roadshow and presenting those to our key agencies and partners and policymakers. So this is a way to make sure that our teachers are prepared to teach the whole child, to recognize the challenges, the red flags that may exist, and refer students to make sure that they have the support that they need. And everything that goes through the governor and myself goes through a 3-pronged test when we talk about education. 1, it has to put students at the center and put them first. 2, it has to make sure that we support the people who support our kids every day, because our teachers and bus drivers and cafeteria workers learning or teaching and working environment is our students' learning environment. And last but not least, we have to provide the resources to our schools so that they can do what we've asked them to do. It seems very simple, and yet it rarely happens. But to quote my grandfather, you can't win the Kentucky Derby with a pack mule. And so if we have a certain expectation of what we want our students to do and learn and know and demonstrate, then we need to make sure our schools have the resources to help our kids reach those goals that we've set for them. And so that's an update from the cabinet, but also from Governor Beshear and myself on the Education First agenda that we have released. And if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to.
Feel free to jump in if you have questions. I'm going to go home.
For a little while, and very happy to see that the social emotional needs of our students continues to represent an important priority spot because we understand what a barrier to learning those unmet needs can be. So I'm just wondering exactly what all that means. I still fear that that situation is kind of getting pushed aside as something that the liberals talk about and not as an aspect, not as an issue that's essential to learning.
Okay.
And so is there a comprehensive way to look at this so that we recognize that we're acting on a foundation of information about learning? This is not a fad. Just like antibiotics were once a fad. Now it's essential to practice. So I guess I'm just hopeful and yearning that, some kind of all hands on deck approach will allow more people to recognize that this is not a fad. This is essential to the interest of our students everywhere, in every community. Research on this in Kentucky confirms young people across the state are really burdened with trauma. And that does not make for a learner ready to take risk and ready to dream about a future. We need them to do all of that. Dream about a future that is worthy of their best effort and take the risk of trying to get there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And thank you for pointing that out. And I do think when we talk about social and emotional learning, it's really key and critical that we talk about it as a piece of educating the whole child, right? Just as much as reading, writing, and arithmetic has become a part of curriculum and instruction and teaching and learning and deeper learning, all the things that we talk about, right? The students who come to school prepared to absorb all of that are probably the ones who are fed and clothed and don't have, traumatic issues with their families at home. And not every kid has that. We all know that to be an issue. The example that I use for making sure that our teachers have the training and wherewithal to recognize the challenges is we all know every year we take the bloodborne pathogens training, right? Every year. Now, thank goodness I never had to use it, but I had it every year like clockwork. But halfway through my teaching career, when I left the profession to become lieutenant governor, I had never had any kind of professional development around mental health or social and emotional learning or any of those things. But my classes were full of kids who were homeless and in foster care and going home to parents who were addicts or living with grandparents because their parents were addicts. And that was part of my day. It became a regular part of my day, and yet I was ill-equipped to recognize, refer, offer support in any way. And so it's really hard to separate what a child is going through from what you want them to learn and know and be. And so that's kind of, that's where we're going with this. But I do agree that making sure that we talk about this in the way of educating the whole child is critically important.
Thank you both. Dr. Talent.
Thank you for being here. Really appreciate the kind of economic development opportunities you're providing for the state. Are you hearing from those employers what kind of workforce they need? And if they need something we're not providing, can you use that leverage to get the funding that's needed for the professional development? It's going to make those employment bases stronger than what they are now.
Absolutely. And as we build the training center, for example, I'll just use the Ford and SKO example that they are ECTC and Hardin County Schools are actually partnering to build a training facility and a pipeline that goes directly into what Ford needs, right? But I will say this, and that's just one example on a much larger scale. We talk about this every day. But I also think about how many business leaders I have met with who say, if you can get me somebody who can show up on time and who can pass a drug test, who can work with other people, who can solve problems, who can think critically, I can teach them how to do X, Y, and Z, right? And so making sure that our students aren't just sitting and getting in a classroom, but are learning how to collaborate while they're picking up this content, learning how to, solve big problems and create solutions that communicate those solutions. That's not something you can do on a standardized test. So unfortunately, that's not something that always gets top billing, but it's something that our economy absolutely needs. That's what our business leaders are crying out for. And so being able to build that and making sure that every kid has that opportunity is really important. When I was at Nelson County High School as an assistant principal, I led the profile of the graduate work. And so we worked with business leaders in the community and said, what do you need? What are you looking for? And that helped us inform how our students would take on projects and project-based learning and things like that to help build those skills necessary for these companies. So I think that's twofold. I think some of it is absolutely academic and information-based, but so much of it is interpersonal that we've got to teach these students how to be successful there too.
Heard me stand here before. I was on a panel with a head of HR for Boeing, and he said, I don't think I ever fired an engineer because they couldn't do the engineering, but I fired some because they couldn't communicate, couldn't work with other people. And then to look at the ceiling, he said, that thing you used to call soft skills, I think are really the harder skills
Yes.
that we really need there. Good, thank you.
It's a great conversation that highlights our new Kentucky Portrait of a Learner since October. And it's really easy for me to draw a bright line between both of your questions and your comments about the whole child. And our aspirations for every Kentucky learner is that she would leave us with the mastery of academic content, in addition to all of those skills and dispositions that we know will ultimately make her successful in the workforce. Dr. Poe and I both had a chance to be in Hardin County last academic year. They invited us down to talk about, what do you do if you're the superintendent of a big, fast-growing district? And we both said, follow your team, right? So we weren't super helpful, Randy. I don't know, but no, just that we were honest. The mobilization that's happening there is really colossal, and just think a lot about the superintendents, principals, teachers, and families in that area that are getting ready for this pretty significant boon in the community there. I think they're thinking about the right things. They think about these partnerships with business and industry, post-secondary, and P-12 schools. I think that's powerful.
It speaks to the critical importance of the Commonwealth Education Continuum that we've all put together and kind of launched over the last few years about how this is one direct line.
Yeah.
And we can't afford to have any breaks in the line, or we're setting kids up for a tougher time than they should have. So for us all to be on the same page and working towards the same goal from early childhood through the workforce, I think that sets a great tone for building up this industry that's coming in Kentucky, building our economy with all the opportunity that we can provide. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. I feel like somebody's out there waiting to take you to someplace else, and they're reminding you it's Tuesday afternoon.
I know, right?
We're glad you're here. Thank you so much. So at this point, we'll turn our agenda to the riveting consent agenda discussion. You guys are used to the routine now. The department staff have identified these items as those that are non-controversial, somewhat routine in nature. As a reminder, this consent does require one vote for all of the items on the consent. But take a minute to review those. I know you've seen the details in the portal. Any member could ask that one or more of those items be pulled for action as a full consideration. Do we have any requests to remove items from the consent agenda? All right, hearing no requests for items to be moved, I will ask the board to entertain a motion to approve all items on the consent agenda as presented.
I make a motion with so approved.
Thank you, Mrs. Bowling. Do we have a second? Thank you, Ms. Adams. Any further discussion about consent? All those in favor of approval of the consent agenda, please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. I wasn't sure whether Associate Commissioner Hilton was going to be able to be with, thank you so much. David Wickersham is with us on behalf of the OCO team today to provide an overview of the proposed amendments for 707 KAR 1:002, also in the portal. Hi, welcome.
Good afternoon. I have lived in Veronica Sullivan, who is the director of the division of IDE. So if any technical questions, right, she may jump in. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you. The amendment that we have before you today is prompted by some fairly recent but ongoing federal action around this particular issue. 1002 is the definitional section that applies to all of the administrative regulations that the board has around special education. What we're proposing to do here, the two primary areas that we're tinkering with or asking that you tinker with are in 129 and 165. Each one of the proposed amendments delete language that specify ranges of acuity of hearing loss, and then on the visual side, of degrees of visual acuity that are currently necessary to establish eligibility for these two types of disability. The reason that we're proposing to tinker with these is that the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, does not contain either one of these restrictions or kind of guidelines in that particular way. So the Office of Special Education Programs back in 2014 had advised states essentially that while it is permissible for states to have their own definitional sections, you cannot have a definitional section that narrows in any way the definitions that you're applying for eligibility purposes. So that's in 2014. Then in 2017, they refreshed that by issuing another memorandum to state directors of special education, essentially reminding the 2014 letter and making it clear that you cannot have, consistent with the IDEA, any kind of regulatory definitions that suggest that you have a two-step process for eligibility. In other words, you cannot say first you have to have this level of acuity loss and then go on to an adverse educational impact. You're not permitted to essentially have a pretest before you get into that part of the eligibility. So a little bit of age on those two sources of information from the federal government. Then on November the 17th of this year, OSEP, the Office of Special Education Programs, held a technical assistance call for all of the states, reminding everybody about the 2014 letter, reminding everybody about the 2017 letter, and disclosing that they had been monitoring states and the regulations that they had in place to see if they had made any amendments or changes necessary to conform with those. So we were thankfully already kind of moved on getting this before you at that time. On November the 20th, we presented these proposed amendments to the State Advisory Panel on Exceptional Children. Had a unanimous vote to approve those amendments at that meeting. Then we appeared before LSAC then on the 22nd, I think it was. Again, had a unanimous vote recommending that we go ahead and adopt these changes. So we're before you now just asking that you approve that to bring us a little bit more in tight compliance and alignment with the IDEA.
Lots of diligence happened across that. Thank you so much, David. Do you have questions for Veronica or David about the revisions to the amendment? Somewhat technical in nature. Well, Dr. Robinson.
If you don't mind, I'm wondering if this revision that brings us into better alignment also requires additional efforts to communicate with parents and teachers about this really rather technical change, but as I was going through it, I thought, who needs to know and what do they need to know and how we gonna tell them?
So we have annual trainings that we provide for directors of special education to parent groups. The state advisory panel is actually composed. It's a federally prescribed list of folks, but it includes parents, teachers, school administrators, folks in other branches of government who have some involvement with students' disabilities. So that was kind of a good preview for us to reach out to some of those audiences in terms of eligibility changes. Our thought is that there should not really be any additional expense for the department in terms of adding this onto the annual trainings that we already provide. And it's our belief that because districts are aware of the fact that they've got this federally prescribed obligation, we're pretty much following this particular way of doing things already consistent with the IDEA. The focus of OSEP seemed to be on making sure that there could not be any misperception about eligibility. And we were kind of reducing the barrier there by making the proposed change.
At this time, I would ask the board to entertain a motion to approve the proposed amendments to 707 KAR 1:002.
So moved.
I have a motion from Dr. Robinson, second from Dr. Todd. Any further discussion or questions? All those in favor of approval of the amendment, please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Thank you very much. In the nick of time, Deputy Commissioner Thomas Woods Tucker, along with Chief Academic Officer Mickey Ray and an entourage, are with us to share about the Kentucky Academic Standards first for science, 704 KAR 3:303.
Afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for welcoming the entourage today. My name is Mickey Ray, and I'm the Chief Academic Officer in the Office of Teaching and Learning. I have several people that I would like to introduce at this time. Sarah Peace is with us today. She is the Policy Advisor in the Office of Teaching and Learning. Crystal Rowland serves as the Director of the Division of Program Standards, so all of the academic standards in that process is overseen by that particular division. We have Regina Lieber from the American Institutes for Research. She was our partner for the science review. Of course, we have Dr. Tucker, as you all know, Deputy Commissioner overseeing the Office of Teaching and Learning. And then we have Beth Brightway, who was our AIR facilitator for the social studies review from this round. So very excited to get into our presentation involving both sets of academic standards today, science and social.
Okay, excellent.
Started. I am going to just talk a little bit about the process in general. And the next slide shows you some of the essential components of the standards review process statute. So 158.6453. It dictates that the committee members are charged with revising standards per the 6 qualifications. And the members of the advisory panel and review committee, they do truly internalize those requirements and components. It's language that is used to them. And I know that both Dina and Beth could speak to the fact that they process the vision for the work in association with the requirements of the standards review statute. On the next slide, you can see we have detailed the standards review process. And so beginning in 2017, with the passage of Senate Bill 1 at that time, the KBE is required to facilitate the process of standards review on a 6-year cycle. And so science is before you today for that very reason. So it was the turn of the Kentucky Academic Standards for Science to be reviewed per the larger requirements in 158.6453. And if you look at that last column, so we are nearing the end of the process, the SPARC committee, the Standards Assessment Process Review Committee, they met on November the 21st and did find that the process was sufficient for both science and for social studies. We also had legislative meetings with interim joint, as well as appearing before LSAC for all of these same regulations as well. They were approved at that time. So I'm going to turn it over now to Sarah just to talk a little bit more about the two associated regulations that are first up for your vote.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? Do I need to move? Okay. It's a pleasure to see you again. Dr. Brewer, if you don't mind going to the next slide, I'm going to discuss these two regulations together because they impact one another. Prior to 2017, the academic standards were housed in one large document that was under 704 KAR 3303. After Senate Bill 1 was passed in 2017 and the revision process that Mickey described was put into place, as each content area was revised, instead of leaving it in 303, we would take each content area and give it its own regulation number under Chapter 8. So what you're seeing here for science is a new regulation in Chapter 8 under 704-8120. For 3303, that document now only houses the Kentucky Academic Standards for Visual and Performing Arts. So once we complete that review process, which is underway right now, we will be able to repeal 303 and each content area will be under Chapter 8. I want to talk just briefly about the Kentucky Academic Standards for Science timeline for revision. Typically, this process is a 2-year process from beginning to end to review and revise the standards. In the case for science, this process began in October of 2020, and we know that the COVID pandemic was very impactful for schools and definitely impacted the timeline here. The committee members on the advisory panels and review committee are predominantly teachers in the field, and they spend a lot of time really devoted to this work to make sure that we have quality standards in Kentucky, and that requires them to be out of their buildings. And so because of COVID and school closures and some shortages, that was very difficult to be able to get teachers to be able to work on the standards, and that extended our timeline. In addition, we had 2 natural disasters occur during the review process for science that also impacted our timeline as well. So their work, January 2021 through February 2021, there was a survey on the current Kentucky Academic Standards for Science. In April 2021 through June of this year, the advisory panel and review committee actually went to work reviewing the standards and making recommendations for changes. That draft survey was then sent out for public feedback for 30 days during June and July. And then in August, the committee came back together to review the feedback and come up with the finalized draft Kentucky Academic Standards for Science. The assessment blueprint was reviewed in September of 2022 as well, and all of this was presented to the interim joint in October. On the next slide, you'll see that as Mickey talked about, the advisory panel and review committee really came together with the guiding principles that would direct their work. And they're on the screen there, but they really represent a commitment to clear standards with opportunities for students to engage deeply with science and really to make sense of the world around. There's an alignment to evidence-based and developmentally appropriate instruction that's supported through vertical progression across the grade level and for teachers' access to ongoing professional learning and high-quality resources. At this time, I'm going to hand it off to Dina Leamer from AIR to discuss the feedback that we received from the survey.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Speaking through a mask because I have a cough, and as soon as I start to cough, it's going to go over. During the feedback, if you go to the next slide, as Crystal mentioned, in early 2021, the Regional Comprehensive Center, Comprehensive Center, conducted an initial public comment on the current Kentucky Academic Standards for Science. And as you can see, we've got quite a bit of feedback from different educational stakeholders across Kentucky. And really what we saw, and if you go to the next slide, as our committee members were digging into that first round of public feedback, there were 553 respondents, and overwhelmingly the feedback from that first set of standards was around the need for additional resources and the need for clarifications of what the standards are actually asking students to know and be able to do by the end of instruction. So what our committee members really focused on was clarifying for teachers what those standards actually were asking. And what you'll see, and we have a slide at the end here that shows kind of the overarching layout, which was a big part of their work. After they conducted their initial set of recommendations, if you go to the next slide, the next draft public comment period was in June. And again, we've had quite a bit of feedback from a variety of different educational stakeholders in Kentucky. And on the next slide, you'll see that overwhelmingly, public feedback on this set of draft recommendations was positive. We asked specific questions on that second public survey about the layout because that's where a lot of feedback was received on the first round. And the advisory panels and review committee really wanted to make sure that they were clarifying for educators what these standards were actually asking. In addition to the public comment, if you go to the next slide, there were a series of 7 focus groups that consisted of higher ed science instructors, teacher prep, parents, organizations that support implementation like KSTA, secondary teachers, administrators, and even a student focus group to get feedback on the committee's recommendations. And if you go to the next slide, really kind of the highlights of what the committee were recommending is, of course, the redesign of the layout to really clarify for educators what is actually included within the standards themselves. There were some revisions to clarification statements that provide additional information to teachers about what certain standards are asking for. Grade kindergarten through 8th grade are still grade level specific standards, including 6th, 7th, and 8th grade standards. High school is still banded 9-12, so you'll have your life science, earth and space science, physical science, and then engineering, technology, and application of science. And then those are the 4 domains of the standards: the physical science, life science, earth and space, and then engineering, technology, and application of science. And I believe our final slide here shows kind of the new layout of what the standards look like. So all of the standards have their individual page, as you see here. Performance expectation is at the top. You have a box that has the clarification statement and assessment boundary that gives a little bit of additional information to teachers. And finally, the foundation boxes that show the 3 different dimensions that actually go into the makeup of that performance expectation.
And I feel compelled to say, if we take a look at the science and really the practice standards across all of our academic content standards, that's where we connect students to experiences that are vibrant. That's where students are connected to deeper learning, profile of a learner. So those soft skills that were mentioned, like if you look at that last one that was just up on the screen, it said with guidance. I did not bring my glasses. I know it talks about investigation and collaborating with peers. I turned 43. I'm falling apart. But yes, so those components, those soft skills are really embedded in the practice standards. And I don't think we talk about that enough, but I think there's power there, and certainly connectivity to our larger statewide initiatives. So at this time, we're welcome to take any questions related to science or to the 303 regulation that removes science.
Questions? I didn't know if she would. But here's my question. Having Nikki to follow up, you're talking about the process skills and skills required for applying content and actually making use of it, making it really worthy content. So my question is, how now do we crosswalk and make sure that our students have an opportunity to document and demonstrate and document their proficiency in those skills? That's one important question that I think we need to. It's a different. If we say it's important, let's measure it, let's document it, let's examine our efficacy and making sure. And the other part is concerns the process for consensus building. And I'm going to say affirmation, evaluating the standard as an academic pursuit and as a principal pursuit, in that our students know how to use what they know or use the content that is presented to them. And I'm wondering if there are any recommendations to strengthen what looks like a very substantial, valid, high integrity process. I guess my curiosity concerns the degree to which we can make it more, we can involve more people. So.
And that has been a common question across all of the committees that we've spoken to. And I think we are working very hard to work with our existing KBE media outlets and avenues to communicate that messaging. But to your point, Vice Chair, I think we're going to also need to work better with our cooperatives to get the message out. At one of the surveys, the release stated, and we are somewhat limited by the timetable that's prescribed in the statute, but you'll notice that a survey that went out in June, there were fewer respondents because people are out of school and they're transitioning, and frankly, they want a break from likely having to think about science standards and other things. And so I think that we need to try to work with the flexibility that we can to ensure, number one, that it's communicated adequately. I think we need to work harder to engage more student voice within the process. And that's been an area, and we've worked very hard to get student representation and student feedback related to the Cast for Science. But the fact that it was even a challenge speaks to the larger point that I believe you're making. So that it is an area of growth, and we are certainly open to further recommendations. But each time we have shared this, we've been given further avenues that I think we can pursue as we move forward.
And those are two questions that we've talked about as a team and that kind of hinted at during the LSAC presentation, particularly crosswalks as well as consensus building. And for me, it's been great the last 2 years coming from K-12, watching this beautiful team work to build consensus and to really inform our more importantly, our students, and inform our district level, the building level folks about this process. And it's been, again, great for me coming as a former superintendent and also as a curriculum director of a large district, seeing how the magic, how the soup is made at the state level, and taking the experiences from what I saw again as a superintendent and as a director of curriculum. Now I have a more comprehensive view. Great work that people are doing here in Kentucky. And the last thing I want to say, I served as a consultant for a while for ARR, the American Institute for Research, who is helping to facilitate the standards. And we really have benefit. In fact, Mickey and I had this conversation. It's been almost a year and a half, seems like 20 years. It's working with Commissioner Glass and Amy, maybe our chief academic officer. We talked about the role that ARR plays. ARR is really key here in Kentucky because they've also been known to create great assessments, so they can help us out with the assessments. We can use that knowledge they have and create assessments, but also now facilitate the standards. Now, by statute, they can't do both here in Kentucky, but we certainly could benefit from the knowledge of ARR that they have in creating great assessments. They still do, not here in Kentucky, but elsewhere in the state. So we're very, the state is very beneficial.
Thank you. And I think I have a question for Crystal, and it's a really easy question. It's been a long time since I was elbow deep in standards. Is the notion of assessment boundary, is that a new formatting notion, or have we been doing that for a while? Tell me a little bit about how that, how the field uses assessment boundaries in this work.
I think it may be better if you were to represent sort of the conversations that occurred with the Advisory Committee on that.
Sure. So Actually, the current Kentucky academic standards for science are based on the next generation science standards. They do include assessment boundaries. So those were put in there back in 2013 during the original development of the NGSS to help large scale state developers, so your state tests, to know kind of this is the stopping point for this standard when you are for the purpose of large scale state testing.
Okay.
It doesn't limit instruction at all. A lot of teachers will go beyond that in the classroom because students want to go beyond that. It's just that limit for the large scale state test. But as you pointed out with the new layout, it makes it very clear. It really draws your attention to both the clarification statements and that boundary.
A cherry on that is definitely unique to
Yeah.
the Kentucky.
Yeah, for science.
Yes, Dr. Tom.
Really applaud the process you've gone through and what you've had. You know, it's one thing to write a standard document and write an assessment document, but the hands have to get really dirty in between those two. And one of the guiding principles is teachers at all grade levels have ongoing access to high quality science professional learning and resources to help students make sense of the natural world. So the collaboration, that's an extra burden trying to teach that process. Where does professional development fit in the funding for this so that teachers can have the ability to get that?
Dr. Todd, you were cueing me up beautifully for a part of my presentation tomorrow around statewide support in teaching and learning for science. But we do feel that we have internal responsibilities from the KBE. We have wonderful science experts that live within the Division of Program Standards, but we also have external partners that we are working with as well, such as PIMSR, AIR, et cetera, to provide supports for teachers who are applying these standards within the field and really thinking about designing instruction created around phenomena. So I think that we are only going to get better in that area now that the standards have been further clarified for teachers. And we're looking for some professional learning supports K-12. So really providing tailored supports for elementary teachers and the grade level instruction that's required for their band plus bonus.
Is my part of my question, I'm looking forward to that. Is it when professional development taken out of the budget some time ago has been put back in?
Categorical funding that goes out to schools was really, really cut in small allocation, actually a larger allocation was passed around the budget. It is unlike textbooks and instructional resources, they did get allocations. It's never been huge. When I was superintendent, it was $13 a teacher or something. I mean, it's $13 per student. That's quite right.
In listening to the lieutenant governor, the things that are coming to the state, the demand for what we're talking about is by the people who are investing their jobs in this state. There ought to be some leverage with the legislature to say, you need to be able to prepare the teachers for this. We can't just load them up with a standards document and say we're going to assess you if you can't do the work in between to give them a shot at doing what they need to do. And it may be time to revisit the legislation. That was one of my comments, or whether these entities that are coming to the state, they're going to need an educated workforce, can help us put pressure on the legislature to put the kind of funding in that's going to be needed. You don't make the Lord doesn't make a step function. Most of the time it's kind of a gradual curve. But if we're going to make a step function and change the economy and bring these people here, they ought to expect us to do something to give them a bit of a step function in education as well. Soapbox. Look forward to tomorrow.
I'd just like to say that when we became aware that we were going to have to revise both the science and social studies standards together at the same time, there was a lot of concern about that just because of the historical political attention both of those standards have garnered. And that would be a contentious and difficult process for us to go through. But I really want to commend all of you and how deftly you handled this. And I think you've done it through being inclusive of all sorts of voices and perspective. You've done it by following closely to the procedures that are set forth in statute, but that you also established clarity around how this process was going to unfold and how people would have the opportunity to be engaged. You've been adaptive as critiques have arisen and criticisms have arisen of this approach or that approach to how the department has navigated this. You've adapted to that or provided a rationale behind why, here's why we're doing it this way. And so at least if you disagree with it, you at least had to acknowledge that it made sense. It was rational. Why we were making the decisions that we did. And you have adhered to the value that's in United We Learn around co-creation on these. So I just want, from my perspective, to let all of you know how much I appreciate that. I see it. Thank you to the staff of the department and to the support and facilitation we receive from AAO.
Thank you.
On that lovely note, we do have leave from Todd to consider both of these items in one motion, which would include a motion to approve the amendments to 704 KAR 3:303, and then the new regulation where science will live 704 KAR 8:120. Do we have such a motion? So, Dr. Robinson, in second. Dr. Poe, any further discussion or question from the team for the team? All right, all those in favor of approval, please respond by saying aye.
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 Excellent, thank you so much. Now wipe off science.
Okay, well, I will kick us off with a review of this particular regulation. And unlike science, we are here before you today to bring forward an amended regulation for the Kentucky Academic Standards for Social Studies. And this is due to a specific reason. So with the passage of Senate Bill 1, 2022, which included the Teaching American Principles Act and the codified 158.196, the KBE was required to open the regulation to address the requirements of the law. And so today I'm going to kick us off by talking a bit about the requirements that were embedded into 158.196.
Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal.
As Mickey mentioned, following the passage of Senate Bill 1 in the past legislative session, we are required to incorporate fundamental American documents into the middle and high school social studies standards. This revision process, and Dr. Glass made this point indirectly, is that we could not delay any other content area in their schedule for getting revised, which is why we were working with science and social studies at the same time. The other piece is that this process has to be completed by July 1st of 2023. And that's significantly different than what we have worked with in the past. If we could go to the next slide. I hope you brought your glasses too, but the fundamental documents and speeches are listed here, and I don't need to read those to you. I'm not the only social studies teacher in the room who probably looked at every one of these closely, but this is the list of the 24 fundamental documents and speeches that must be incorporated. It's important to know that this is not an exhaustive list. Districts and schools are able to add on to this. The regulation specifically says that it's not limited to these 24 documents.
Just to clarify that gist of it, so these 24 are required per the law for middle school and high school standards, but the statute actually stated including but not limited to. So the writers, the advisory panel members, and the review committee maintained that language, and you'll see as we go through the presentation, that language also lives within the standards, and I think they were very purposeful in wanting to establish that, of course, we could go above and beyond the required 24 documents. I did want to make note as we go to the next slide. So again, as Dr. Glass mentioned, this was an accelerated timeline due to the July 1, 2023 deadline. So as Crystal talked about, typically it's about a 2-year process. So 1 year for the advisory panel and review committee to come together, do their work, evaluate the survey responses and make those necessary changes. And then 6 to 9 months for the following regulatory process after board approval. So in this case, we had to move very quickly. You can see that Senate Bill 1 2022 was signed into law in April of 2022. And by July, we had to reconvene the advisory panel review committee to address the requirements per statute. We will absolutely, per statute, be maintaining the full-scale revision of the social studies standards in 2025. Hopefully, you will see that as a standalone item at a board meeting and not grouped with many other standards, but that will be the process for us, and that will be maintained as we move forward. So Crystal's going to walk a little bit more through the timeline and then the work around the advisory panel review committee as well.
So as Nikki shared, we pulled together our 2019 advisory panel and review committee together in July to look at the requirements of the Teaching American Principles Act and make the decisions on how best to integrate those fundamental documents into the Kentucky Academic Standards for Social Studies. So in July, they created a draft that went out for survey through our partners at American Institutes for Research. And then October, they came back together to respond to that feedback and to create this finalized draft. On the next slide, I want to take a moment to just kind of orient you to the Kentucky Academic Standards for Social Studies and how it's set up. So we have the standard and then the disciplinary clarification statement. And the standards represent goals or learning outcomes for an educational program. They're vertically aligned expected outcomes for a student. For the disciplinary clarifications include content and concepts to help teachers better understand the expectations of the standards. So when the advisory panel and review committee came together, they were looking at places where they could make direct connections with those clarification statements with those 24 fundamental documents for teachers. This would help to ease the implementation in the classroom for the teachers, understanding that in 2025, there will be the regular revision of the standards document. For the high school, the committees also voted to adopt the high school clarification statements, which had lived outside of the Kentucky Academic Standards for Social Studies, but were created in response to feedback following the approval of the 2019 Social Studies standards. So they use those clarification statements as a vehicle to embed those 24 fundamental documents to support teachers in implementing them. But they did make some changes to these initial revisions based on the public feedback that was received when it went out in the survey. And Beth is going to share some information about that.
Was a former high school teacher, so I usually talk loud enough, so I won't try to talk too loud. Thank you for having us, and thank you for setting this up. So now, based on that timeline, the advisory panel had the recommended changes, and then the review committee adopted those and voted on those changes, and that's what created this initial KAS for social studies. So part of your statute, part of your process, and part of any process that I would say for standards, it had to go to public comment. So the draft document came to us at AIR. We built a survey in collaboration with KBE for public comment to make sure that we were giving the public the ability to vote on and give feedback on each of the adjustments that were recommended by the AP and RC. The KBE advertised this link, and I have to read it because I have to tell you everywhere that they put it. So the KBE advertised the survey link to all stakeholders, including Kentucky educational organizations and partners, regional education cooperatives and advisory committees, via the Education Commissioner's weekly emails, formal public press releases, Kentucky teacher website, KDE website, and various multimedia outlets. So that is where the survey was put out in order to gather public feedback. On this slide, you can see a summary of respondents. I'd like to highlight that we were able to receive and get in a short period of time, the normal period of time, but during the fall, to get people to respond. And we had 400 respondents total, and as you can see, a majority were teachers across Kentucky. You can see that 59% of all the counties were represented, and again, 276 of them were teachers. You can also see that 29 identified as administrators. So we did have a fairly diverse set of different stakeholders in addition to those sets, but we really wanted to highlight that teachers were really found this as giving their voice to give feedback on these recommendations. The next slide, please. This is the summary of the public feedback. The overwhelmingly amount of respondents, they overwhelmingly agreed to the recommendations that were put forth in the public survey. It was a majority that agreed and or were neutral on the standards revised by the committee. The disagreement that you'll see on there, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, was typically around the fact that the documents were placed in the clarification statements and not in the actual text of the standard, which Crystal was just trying to explain the difference between clarification statements and statements. Clarifications statements are really helpful tools as part of the standards to help teachers implement the standards with fidelity, really giving meaning to those. And so the initial step that the APNRC took, the recommendations that they put forward, was a majority of those documents were in the clarification statements to help teachers understand the standards and really see where those explicit connections were, those natural connections to the documents. This disagreement now was going to be addressed by the advisory panel and review committee when they reviewed the public data. So that'll be the next slide. So what happened is, and what happens in your process is that you have a recommendation of standards, they go to public comment, and then you bring the AP and RC back together to look at that data. So they were able to really look at the rich set of data that was put back by the 400 people across Kentucky and really make try to figure out what needed to be done to make adjustments to these standards. And what you can see, the next couple of slides will show you the specific responses that they had to public feedback. So you look at this standard, the K-5 standard. This standard was already in the standards, along with that disciplinary clarification. And it had been mentioned that this is a model as part of this bill. Like this is what people wanted to see. And so they acknowledged that, but the one thing that they changed in this space is they revised this standard to replace foundational documents with fundamental documents, so it correlates better with the statute or with the law, right? And it also, any other changes that they were gonna make, it would lead to some coherence because you were using the same language that we were talking about in terms of documents, fundamental documents. So that's the one addition that they made to this, which led to, based on public feedback, the next slide. So the next slide highlights after the AP and RC really did an in-depth review of the public data and public comments. As I said, the one kind of adjustment that they really saw commonly addressed was that the public wanted to see these documents in the language of the standard. So what they did was, and we had, the beauty of this is that we had elementary, middle, and high school AP and RC in the same room together so they could talk to each other about how these documents and where these documents fit most naturally into the standards. So based on the public feedback, they adjusted and made a brand new 8th grade standard that correlated with that 5th grade standard really cleanly. It has the exact language from the law in it, the exact documents in it. But what it did was it sticks to the time period of 8th grade, right? So you're not pushing outside of 8th grade. You're honoring that statute, or you're honoring the law, and you're putting that language at a grade level appropriate, and those documents at a grade level appropriate space to make it really truly manageable for teachers in terms of implementing this. And then if you look at the next slide, you'll see this whole coherence piece. Then they also, based on public comment, created a new high school standard that complemented that. You can see that flow, which is really important in standards, right? So they wrote a new high school standard that built off of the elementary and the middle school standard, included the exact language and the documents. And what again, it's time bound. So it's really developmentally appropriate according to the set of high school standards of what students should be engaging with at that. So they were really clearly explicit connections. So the AP and RC were really able to look at this, look at the public comment, respond to it really clearly, and make it this natural, coherent connection within the standards. think it's up to you now.
Thank you, Mayor. So we're happy to answer any questions you may have regarding the process for social studies.
Questions for me?
I just had a comment, it's to point out that the language around to include but shall not be limited to, which I want to just underscore is really important in this context of the state legislature prescribing curricular documents. I've been outspoken about the concerns that I have around a political process determining which documents should be included or excluded. So I do appreciate the General Assembly including that language around included but not limited to, because I think there are good questions around which documents get highlighted and lifted up, who is represented in those documents and what viewpoints are represented in those documents, what documents were left on the cutting room floor about that. So I think that we have met the intent of the statute around these fundamental documents and appropriately place them in different developmental levels for students to engage with, but also left the door open for teachers to bring in other documents, several of which would be necessary so that students would understand the full context of some of these. You can't take, for example, one that drew a lot of attention while Reagan's Time for Choosing, you can't take that in isolation without also understanding the context in which that speech was given and what were some of the things happening. So there's a host of other documents and information that needs to be put around it so that it makes sense. So I'll just make that point that include but not limited to is really important here.
And I think that goes back to what you have all been talking about, that key is professional development, right? That's to help educators also see those explicit connections, but also understand and how to work through helping students understand the contextual background, the connections to Kentucky, the connections to the standards is really important. The other piece that I do want to highlight that I think is very important is that public feedback, there was a lot of meat in there for 2025, which is exciting. So we have some discussions about who was there, who wasn't, all really good feedback from that set, particularly of educators and other stakeholders, to help inform the 2025 work moving forward. So it was really exciting to see that space as well.
I also would like to give the legislature some credit in that I saw one of the major newspapers, the Post or the New York Times, did a follow-up article on all the critical race theory bills, and they had a map of different states that had passed anti-CRT bills that limited speech. They had Kentucky listed as one of them. I sort of cringed when I saw that because I wasn't sure that the characterization of that was quite right. So I think what the legislature has done here is it is trying to establish here are some foundational, fundamental principles that they want to make sure are embedded in the curriculum, and that there are some documents they want to make sure students are exposed to in the course of their education. But again, it's not limited to those things. And as the example standard that you had up in the clarifying language, it clearly pointed out something that's really uncomfortable, that slavery was protected in the foundational American documents. And later on, as values and morals and perceptions of that institution changed, so did the laws of the country. And that is part of the American story. And so we're not prohibiting that conversation from taking place in Kentucky. So I did cringe when I saw Kentucky sort of swept into how other states had approached this. Some of the same tendencies and reasons that we are here today were certainly present here as they were in other states. But I don't think that we ended up with a law that gags or limits teachers and students on what they can talk about in classrooms. So I just want to make that point.
I concur. I think that's a fair assessment. Any questions, team? We just have one motion at hand for social studies, and that would be a motion to approve amendments to 7OR. Nope. It's harder and harder as the day goes on. It's reading science. Sorry. I would ask the board to entertain a motion to approve the proposed amendments to 704 KAR 8:060 required academic standards for social studies.
So moved, Chair Young.
Thank you. Prairie. We have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mrs. Bowl. Any further discussion? Thank you. All those in favor of approval of the amendment, please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you to the team. I'll invite KBE Chief Performance Officer Karen Dodd and KBE Division Director David Cook to join us at the table to share about the Kentucky United We Learn Council and the CGSA grant.
Afternoon. I'm excited to be here today to talk about the kickoff that happened last week. Meredith, are you going to queue up for me a video that we have? So while she cues that up, let me just give you a little bit of basic information about the Cool Council. So we have 70 members officially on the Cool Council. About 59 of them attended last week for one or both days. Let's see, they consist of 3 committees. So those committees align with the 3 big ideas of United We Learn. On day 1, the members were able to go to different exhibits that were occurring. So we had members from the different districts. We have at least 14 different districts here talking about the work that they are currently doing, which all aligns to United We Learn. On day 2, they broke out into their committees and really focused on getting to know each other for one thing, and also starting to put together a charter for each of their committees. So let's go ahead, instead of me talking a lot about what happened, we've got about a 4-minute video where you can see some pictures and video of what occurred through those 2 days.
Students have been a central part of this effort from the beginning. If we think back about the initial data collections and empathy interviews that we went through that resulted in United We Learn, it was led by students. We had students conducting those interviews, conducting those focus groups, gathering that information, so they were there from the beginning. They're important in this work now.
So I joined the United We Learn Council because I've been involved with a lot of district level innovation and some things at the state level, and I really wanted to see where all of that came together, where our districts were able to talk about what they've been doing and share that knowledge with other people so that we can get those experiences to all Kentucky students, and also so we can build a better future.
As a student representative, as a student in my high school, I can see how education impacts my peers. And just that, a lot of my peers are now becoming burnt out, and I don't want that because I know that they have so much potential to do such amazing things.
To provide a voice from a student perspective from a small Western Kentucky school, and to make a difference for all the students after me.
To provide voice and advocacy to other people and representation.
I wanted to inspire change in people that, that not only that are in the same age category as I'm in, but kids that are younger than me, and kids that might not have had the same opportunities that I've had.
Applying moonshot thinking to complex challenges empowers people to look for unconventional solutions with a high probability of success. Enables teams to use fast-paced experimentation to continuously learn and improve. Assumes that everything is possible, looking beyond established ways of thinking and doing. and removes the fear of failure and helps teams focus on success. I believe that Kentucky's United We Learn initiative is our own moonshot.
They spent the last 2 days thinking about what was in the United We Learn report, the 3 big ideas of making vibrant learning experiences, bringing innovation to education, particularly around assessments and accountability and collaboration and working closely with people in our communities. And they developed goals within each of those and started to put some thought into how we more clearly define what those mean and how we work toward them and what it could look like.
We have set our sights on meeting the full spectrum of needs of every learner in every school in the Commonwealth, raising achievement for all learners and closing gaps among student groups while intentionally engaging communities in fulfilling the unlimited promise of public schools in their own backyards.
We ended with a strong sense of positivity, optimism, momentum that I think is built on the same spirit that's across the state in Kentucky. We know that there are all sorts of local examples of this work already underway and years of capacity around these efforts that's already underway. So we build upon that, and there's a real sense of purpose and hopefulness going forward.
Credit goes to Joe Raguso as part of the communications team for putting that together. I think he did a great job, and if we can get it back up, you'll get to see the rest of that. The meeting was recorded, both days were recorded, so if you want to see more of the actual meeting, you can go out to the media portal and view that. Like Mickey, I need glasses too. I actually just got contacts, but I still can't see, so not helpful. So moving forward, the committees are going to be meeting. They all agreed that they were going to meet on a monthly basis. They also acknowledged that they're going to need to meet together. So not just in their separate committees, but there's going to need to be some collaboration among those committees. So they're going to be doing that moving forward. They've each scheduled their first meeting. I think the first one is actually meeting December the 12th. So they are ready to go and they're eager to get this work started. That was very clear. The committees are going to continue to onboard members as well. So while we have 70 members on the pool council, they are able to continue to bring on new members to help with anything that if they feel like they're missing a stakeholder group or something like that, they are more than welcome to add to their committee. We've already had several people reach out because members have been talking about this work because they're excited about this work. So several people have already contacted me asking if they can be a part of this work. And so I'm forwarding them on to the committee facilitators and we're signing them up. And the pool council will meet again in June. We're looking at a location right now. This one took place in our downstairs training rooms, which are not available in June. So we are looking for other locations to start scheduling the rest of our meetings. The pool council will meet twice a year. So we're looking at June and November of each year through 2024, because this is a 4-year grant that is funding this work. Just as a reminder that this council is an advisory group to KBE and to the board. So what I'm hoping is that as they continue to do their work, they will be coming and sitting in front of you. We will have members of these committees that will share with you the co-creation of documents they are creating, the ideas that they have around policy and innovation and vibrant learning experiences for students. I think it's really important that you hear directly from them. So hopefully sooner than later, we will be able to get that started and have those members of those committees sitting in front of you. Yeah, and I think the last thing I just want to share is, and I think Commissioner Glass already might have said this to you all, but we're really excited that Audrey Gilbert, who I know is sitting behind me here, is going to be the interim chair for the committee. So we think it's really exciting to have a student kind of leading this work as we kick it off. And with that, unless you have questions, I'll turn it over to David to talk more about the grant.
As I'm David Cook, by the way, I think everybody knows who I am. I'm the director of innovation here at the department. So when Dr. Glass really challenged us about, I guess, almost 18 months to 2 years ago now, with the United We Learn vision, its initial phases, we had a whole lot of exciting things happening. And as you might imagine, we worried a little bit about how we were going to pay for it. So we decided that it might be good if the federal government was providing an opportunity, which they call the competitive grant for state assessment. They put it out there every few years, and it's an opportunity for states to think about innovative assessment accountability conversations. So we got our buddies together, Center for Innovation and Assessment, Center for Innovation and Education, CIE, and we wrote a grant back in the spring, grant application. And yay, we were awarded the grant in September, $3 million over 4 years. And most of what happened the last 2 days last week happened because of the grant. If you look at the grant, a big chunk of the grant is the United We Learn Council as the place by which we can bring together voices to have conversations about these things and bring advice to you all in the department about what changes we might need. The most exciting thing to me, just as a side note to the meeting last week, is just to see how much they're going to probably bring to you. Because they've got a lot of great ideas already. It just got started. And there's a lot of passion in these local communities. When you think about that third big idea about sort of co-creating with communities, they're ready to co-create with us. And that's important. So the grant allows us to engage more deeply in all these areas of the United work, in creating more vibrant experiences for all children, in innovating, especially in assessment accountability, primarily grant, but also connects to those other two ideas, to this third idea, building a bold new future for communities and ourselves. So we're excited. We're able, as part of the grant, to hire a project manager with us starting on December 16th, full time. We'll make sure that Karen and I are always keeping our places in the right, doing the right things and doing what we're supposed to do with, as it relates to that federal grant, because you all know that federal grants, no paperwork whatsoever. So if you all have any questions about the grant, I'm going to shift a little bit in a second and do a little activity with you. But if you have any questions about the grant, Dr. Poe.
I have a question, I guess, since you made a statement saying they're ready to bring lots to us. Are we ready to respond to that actually as a department, as a board, to change our processes to meet those things? Or are we setting that up for that? Simple question, but are we ready to really, truly make the changes that they're asking us when they come forward in the area of assessment? That was the key question.
I think that's probably a question to hold the mirror up to, because.
No, I'm ready, but I'm asking you, or
no,
as a department,
I'm
ready.
I'm ready.
I know you know.
And I think he's ready. I think that's I think to me, Dr. Poe, that's the difference.
Yeah.
The difference is we, from top down, from this board to Dr. Glass to all of us at the department, we see everything we've been talking about so far today needs to happen. We need to have, to what the Lieutenant Governor said, everything needs to change. And this group And the way this group was formed, just like we had the coalition last year, was formed in such a radically inclusive way that we had voices from all over the state and from every stakeholder group to help us think about. And one of the best parts of the 2-day meeting were the presentations that made by the various laboratories of learning and other of our deeper learning initiatives. Those were exciting presentations because those people came to work they were actually doing, that they had committed themselves to themselves. It wasn't something where we said, go do it. They did it. And I think we have the opportunity here to make changes. And as the commissioner said a little while ago, we have opportunities with the legislature. We have opportunities to really make a difference. And I think the way we went about this and are going about this is what makes it different.
And I would just add to that, that strategically speaking, that becomes our job. If United We Learn is our vision, how we implement that is going to be up to the department, because they're bringing us recommendations, and it's going to really be up to the board when it comes to policy and up to KBE when it comes to implementation of different things that we have to help with.
And I will say, Dr. Poe, real quickly, part of the grant, specifically written into the grant, was as we make these changes, we're probably going to have to shift the way we operate, just from a process standpoint, service standpoint. And that's built in. The grant talks about KBE listening, and as this stuff starts to happen, rethinking how we do business to better support that kind of a future of education. So we can't just say we want a future of education and then we set up all of our structures to the old system. So we don't want to do that. Yes, ma'am.
So to follow up on Randy's question, it's like I have a dream that KBE is doing a lot more work supporting inter-rater reliability for locally designed performance assessments that feed into an accountability system that respects those assessments as valid representation of what students know. I mean, that's an aspect of where we're going. So, noting that we have a federal grant, I'm wondering the degree to which we might organize now to inform our federal partners of what we're doing and how they can get ready to help us transition from spending so much money on census testing of stuff we're not doing, so we can start spending more money on these locally designed assessments of this high integrity accountability process that we are doing.
That's exactly right. And that, as you might imagine, there's a lot of reporting and a lot of interaction that myself and Susan Strange, who is our new project manager, will be doing as we have our quarterly meetings with the feds. We'll be sharing about what the council's doing. We'll be sharing about the conversations that we're having with you about policy. That's the other huge piece to the grant. The other huge piece to the grant begins with a policy, in essence, a policy audit that's going to occur over this winter time, where we look at every single policy that might be affected here, and then we begin to think about what needs to happen to change those, whether they be regulations that you all control or whether they be statutes that, like the accountability statutes, and not throwing out accountability, but I love what you just said, Dr. Robinson, because what we're looking for and the word we like to use as one of the other habits of the United We Learn is reciprocity. We want reciprocal accountability systems, and we want them to be things where the local knowledge and the local accountability is valued as part of the larger system, so that it's a back and forth about the state has parts of it, the local communities have parts of it. So,
I mean, moving forward, as there, we continue, just their summative assessment, 60 months after their new kids, why aren't we looking at formative assessments as part of that? So hopefully this grant then allows you to, if that's what district schools, whoever the voice is that's pushing initiatives, that we can start doing that as part of this grant and start applying so that ultimately that we get, whether it's a waiver, change the assessment, do whatever, that schools that are working in that will get a benefit or a credit of that so that they hopefully, and what else can we take off their plate so that they can continue to make this their particular work? And I guess, can you also filling in on the timeline of the grant of some of those things that's moving? I know you were starting.
Yeah.
But what's the end goal? When does the grant, how many years the grant, how many different things, the midpoints, the mid checks? So we kind of know as a board what we're doing, and I'm sure you're gonna update us constantly on it, but as we're starting down this pipe, when we might be able to take those voices and actually implement that change. I mean, we're gonna be implementing it, but possibly the grant making a true change in accountability in the state.
So it's a 4-year grant. So as the federal calendar goes, September 30th, 2026 is the end of the grant. At that point, so beginning thinking about now is the learning, sharing. The council is very front heavy in this grant. The other piece that begins fairly quickly is the policy piece, as we start to do a scan, do an analysis of the policy. And then we will begin to think about the scheduling of policy recommendations that we want to take to the General Assembly. We're obviously not going to take any policy recommendations to the General Assembly 2023. But we do want to share with the General Assembly, both through our own processes, but also the local. When you think about the local laboratories of learning, which is a very big part of this work, those are 16 communities that are working very diligently on their local, and they've got local legislators involved in it. So in 2024, which is the next big, the big session, we will hope to have something going there, an even bigger package probably by 2026. So as we test, as we work on these things, as we see what's working, what kinds of ways we want to change, the whole process flows through. And each time that council meets, you're going to get more information from local communities and from ideas that you're going to bring and add into the package. Thank you. Yeah.
And I just really appreciate Dr. Poe's voice in the conversation, because folks at the superintendent's conference this past weekend came up to me on the side and said, "Is this really going to happen? Really? Like, really? Does he really mean it?" Those are the skeptical voices that are our reality, and it's fair. They've seen decades of No Child Left Behind, high stakes, top-down accountability, and but I remain highly optimistic because we are in post No Child Left Behind world. The feds asked for these grant proposals. They're not going to be surprised by what we're doing in Kentucky. And we have the leadership and the will across the state, I think, to engage in these conversations that can make a really big difference. And I've always been careful because I was afraid that Meredith would slug me, but I think we're in a place where we're going to be field testing a new state assessment and accountability in the fall of 2026, because we are putting all of the pieces in place, not a straight line of pieces, but a moonshot that looks like a messy, rich, important approach to assessment and accountability that respects those 3 tenets: vibrant learning experiences, innovation, and deep community engagement. Jamie and I talked a lot about what assessment looks like in Middlesboro and what it could look like in Middlesboro. That's the part that really gets me excited when I think about where we are. We have an opportunity to make this happen in Kentucky and lead the nation again when it comes to assessment and accountability that drives good things for every learner in the Commonwealth. And that's what we're after, not assessment and accountability that takes us to places we never intended or wanted to go, but instead one that helps us do our work even better. Dr. John, I apologize. I missed you when I jumped in to pontificate a bit.
What you had to say. Who is the granting agency, and is there a link where we can see this proposal?
Yes, it's Department of Ed, U.S. Department of Ed. So, yeah, and you can just go to the grants.
Can you send this
We can
over?
send it to you.
I'll
Yeah,
send
Mary
it.
will send it.
Yeah.
Good, thank you.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, perfect.
Is there one other question that I was thinking of, is there other other states besides Kentucky? So like, is there like 4 states doing this, 5 states, so that there's some commonality?
I can't remember.
19 proposed, I think.
So to me, that's what I said when we were asking that question.
Yeah.
So if they hopefully are having 19 proposals come, they're looking to make these changes too.
Yeah, the one thing I would say, Dr. Bo, to be clear, there's 150 million ways to write an assessment grant. So
We went through that.
that's why
for
you
4 years.
can't, you can't easily say
I know.
that the other 10 states or whatever are doing these, things that
But,
are.
but it's clear in the grant that they're looking for opportunities for
Yes.
states to take this work back. And then we have hope. So the work is not for naught. The work is for something that we're gonna actually potentially by 2026, either have something that we're gonna ask for an alternative assessment to the current assessment, no matter what that is. I don't know. Whatever comes out of this work.
That's right.
But we're gonna have an opportunity to say Kentucky wants to do it this way.
Yeah.
That's great. That's awesome.
That's why we went after it.
And Karen, I wonder if we can invite, what's Lyon's first name? Susan. If we could invite Susan Lyon to the February meeting.
Yeah.
To share that slide deck. I think all of you would be really interested in what she calls them provocations, but what might it look like if it was something other than reading math tests once a year at set grade levels, autopsy, postmortem kind of assessment? What might it look like? And I think that would be really, she could be virtual, of course, and make the presentations.
Get right on that.
Dr. Glass?
Yeah, I have had a chance to interact with some of the other states that are also have received these grants, and I'd say that I'm not critical of what they're doing, but I would say that their efforts are much more incremental in nature compared to what we see Kentucky's approach being. I think to accomplish a different kind of assessment system, you need to look at, can you use formative assessments along the way? And some states are doing that, or they're looking at through course exams, but they're looking at different sort of metrics or weightings for their accountability system. So all that's great, but I think it's all really incremental. And a lot of it has already been done at the district level. It's just not been done at the state level or at a national level. So it's what I really appreciate about the grant proposal that David and Karen and that team put together is that it is bold, and it's a big swing. The uncomfortable answer to your question, Dr. Poe, is this going to result in a different accountability system that will be accepted by the federal government and used in the state of Kentucky in 2026? I don't know. I don't know that.
We have an
We're gonna give it a heck of a try.
Right. The fundamental problems are that the assessment systems that we have, machine scored tests we have, are reduced knowledge to a very narrow sliver that is measured in a very specific way and very artificial circumstance. That's the problem with the test. And the accountability systems have a set of values in them that are important, but they're imposed from Congress through the state legislature on the community. They're not aligned with things that the community says they really value and want to see in their schools. So those are the two major disconnects. The effort that we have underway with this grant is really to try and come at both of those problems. Can we create an assessment system that is richer, broader, gets at the skills that you heard Vicki and her team say are now woven into the standards and appear in your portrait of graduate? Can we get an assessment that is more human and more full? And can we develop an accountability system that better takes into account the preferences of local communities and what they think are important? Those are really good things to work on. But we're going to need a change to state law. We're going to need Congress to do something different for this to take root at an official level. And we can always run kind of a hybrid version of this, right? Create a different system of accountability and measures that run alongside what you're required to do. And we may end up in that situation. I don't want to do that because it's duplicative. It's a lot of extra time. But we may end up in that situation. But the only thing that I can say I know the answer to, Dr. Poe, is if we don't try anything, it's not going to be different. So we're going to take our shot and see what happens. But I think the uncomfortable answer to the question is I don't know. I don't think anybody knows.
But I think, but in answering that or discussion back to that, if we're not willing to go there, then let's don't ask the people to go there. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, we as
And
a board team.
if we as a board team have to be willing to go to our legislators, our federal legislators, and get them behind us and do it. We have to be committed to that. If we're not committed, we can't ask them to commit to something if we're not going to be committed to it. So it's great that it's a grant and we know how grants go all the time. But, I sat here on the other side, 4 years ago when we said we were going to do this, but then we never did it for whatever particular reason. So we don't have to go back over history. So this time we got to just make sure that we're willing to push forward and do what we ask and even ask our local legislators, our state to ask the Fed to make a change.
There's really,
because they didn't do that last time. And that's what I'm saying. When I say we, it means the whole ecosystem.
there's really nothing that I can say at this point. And speaking from my role, that will assuage those that don't believe that this is true, other than to just keep going. And so I'm not going to sit here and promise that it's going to be X, Y, or Z, or that this is, we're not going to see a Charlie Brown football here with you this time. The best thing is just continue forward and then walk the talk.
And I think it's important, two things that are important that are different. My estimation, that I've been here 25 years. The first thing that's different is all of this came from the United We Learn, which was written by who? For who? Who wrote? Who was, the report is the voice of the people of Kentucky, not the Department of Education and not this board. It's the people of Kentucky saying we want a future of education that looks like this. And what it looks like is different, especially around assessment accountability. That's what the people said they wanted. So, and now we have all of these local laboratories of learning that are local communities who are engaged with local legislators. I told somebody that the other day at the meeting and questioned, they didn't see a legislator on the United We Learn Council. Well, it's really hard to have one legislator on the council that can be there at every meeting and that also, but we have the opportunity to have representatives from every county from that council to speak to their local legislatures. And then we have 40 or 50 people over at the Capitol talking about this because they've heard it from their local people. There's more engagement. The other piece that's thankfully the one thankful part of the pandemic is that it gave us a lot of money. And on the school side of this, which I think is just as important and valuable to this being successful, is we're doing these things through some pretty large grants that have also gone out around the world. We have a $25 million grant that's in every school district in the state around deeper learning. We have an almost $8 million grant with project-based learning works, PBL works, which is training a third of our teachers to do project-based learning. The core kind of deeper learning activity that students need. We have other activities going on through my office. So there's tons of actual examples of why this is better that are going to be going on that are also ammunition when we talk to the feds about what we need to change. It's not just, we have these ideas and we have things actually happening because we were fortunate enough to get a lot of funding at the school level to make them happen. So.
And I do think, out of respect for what Dr. Glass is saying, that the proof will be in the pudding, that we will continue as a board team to do this work, to prove that we are serious about the effort. And I have been throwing about the notion that this is our moonshot. Folks thought John F. Kennedy had lost his mind when he said we were going to return him successfully and we were going to do it by the end of the decade. So there are a whole lot of folks never thought that would happen. But to Jason's point, if he had never cast the vision for going to the moon, we certainly wouldn't have gotten there. So I think that it just reminds me, Randy, you inspire me to ensure that we are always talking about this work, that we lock arms and say, this is the right work at the right time, in the right place, and we're going to do it. Yes, ma'am.
You know, as I think about this work and the realities that we have to address, such as, you know, federal requirements, as they get interpreted and imposed various state authorities, and we bring an understanding of the possibilities that could be more nutritious to our students, more efficacious as an application of what we know about learning, how you document what we know, and then how you consider that kind of information to inform what you do next. That is bringing the best of the knowledge about learning to the benefit of our students. That's what we're trying to do. So one of the questions I bring to folks sometimes is, if you were building it today, what would it look like? Well, we certainly wouldn't be caught applying a tool that was built for an industrial era to a context that is about creativity and innovation and getting everybody ready to contribute to that, rather than sorting folks out to the role that somebody prescribed to them when they built the test. Because the test has not failed us yet in giving and reproducing a picture of what we're doing. And right now we know we can no longer afford to have a third of our population unable to contribute to the economy because they get kind of, you know, it just makes it hard. We can't afford that anymore. Plus, it's not just an economic imperative, it's one of peace and prosperity and safety for everybody. We know now when everybody's contributing, all of us are a lot safer than when we relegate a predictable population of our citizens to not being able to contribute. So if we were building it today, it would be inclusive. And guess what? We have the measurement technology to make sure we can be accountable for making it so. So this is the answer to challenging ourselves to build it for today, for the students who show up today, the students that we want to be full contributing citizens and not excluded. So the skepticism is well-earned skepticism. And Randy, I really am going to ask you to keep us honest. Because we've led educators into a blind over and over and over with innovation after innovation and quick fix after quick fix and silver bullet after silver bullet. And the system drives you back into doing what's easy for the system to do, but it's not answering the basic fundamental objective of inclusion and success a broader base, a bigger pie so everybody can have a bigger slice and not be hungry, not be left out. That is a soapbox issue for me, but I swear when I see what we have as resources and assets and tools to bring to it, I don't understand why we can't have it. If we don't have it, it is because we haven't applied enough will, energy, and determination. And I'm going to say this, regardless of what the political winds may bring us, I'm hoping that our colleagues at the local community level will create a voice of demand for this work that assures it will continue. And that kind of ownership is the work I think we have to cultivate, support, inform, inflame, and keep it moving. So that's what I'm committed to doing for the time that we have in the place that we are, because that is where we are. And I think we've inspired citizens at the local community level to even dream, and we've inspired students to come on, tell us what you need, because that's what we ought to be accountable for. And it's going to be hard work, but that is our work. And I'm glad to know we've got KBE staff that can make it happen, Dr. Gladys. We've got assets here. We got
And Dr. Robinson, what you're also talking about is the coherence aspect of this as an agency and as you as a board. One of the things we have to always remind ourselves of is it's not one piece. If somebody comes to you and says, here's a new idea, I come to you and say, here's a new idea, you can't just look at that idea in isolation. You have to go, how does that affect this, and this? It all has to go together. I'm going to tell you a really quick story. And then Meredith, I have a question for you after I tell this really quick story. This happened last week at the council meeting at one of the presentations, one of our districts. It is a great example to me of why we have to keep coherence in mind. When you all are brought standards, when you all are brought graduation requirements, the state of Kentucky requires every student to have an individual learning plan, right? Yet, and this is, I'm now speaking through a superintendent, but we still have a single assessment that measures all students the same way. Even though we tell them that they get to put together a plan, particularly at the high school level, that matches what their interests, needs, and desires are. But then we turn around and say, it doesn't matter that you're doing all that in the classroom, we're going to assess you this way. That's just an example to the field of why you have to talk about all of it together. So, Meredith, my question is, we can continue with what we were going to do. I don't think we necessarily need to, and I don't know where you are on time, because this was a longer conversation than.
Yeah. So I'm not sure what the activity is, but I'm not too worried about time. We go to legislative update. I know Mrs. McCrary has a comment, so let's play this discussion out and then the video to observe.
So the activities, Chair Young, was we were going to look at, was an activity that we did, the leadership of KBE did at the Deeper Learning Dozen meeting a few weeks ago, where we observed. One of the things we talked about that entire week was one of the things we need to have teachers doing is in community, they need to talk to each other about whether they're seeing deeper learning in their school.
Sure. I think we definitely have time and it's worth the conversation. Mrs. McCrary.
Sorry, got to remember that mute, unmute. I'm seeing communities involved. I'm seeing teachers involved. I'm seeing the effort on communication as we weave through this process. I am uncertain what's going on with our teacher ed programs because I feel like they need to be tightly woven into this as well. They're going to have to come out and hit the ground running. What is the status on that?
I think that's a great question. On the council itself, we have Edna Shack, who's a retired teacher educator for Warren. And I think somebody from K-State.
Yes.
But Patrice, I have the same concern. I think one of the things we can recommend, you heard Karen talking about earlier about adding folks to the task force, the committee work. So the council, we don't want to get any larger because of the unwieldiness that could follow. But I do believe some intentional invitation to some of our educator prep programs is warranted. We get those consistent questions about changing expectations in the field without a commensurate expectation for changing the educator preparation process. So Karen, I think that'd be worth a conversation.
Would that be on all three committees or?
I think vibrant learning primarily, and just an invitation to see which of the deans or leads at the prep institutions would be interested in engaging in that conversation.
All right.
I think they sensed that they weren't selected for the pool council. So they thought they had a chance and then weren't. So I don't know if that's a fair understanding or not. So be a way to engage them.
I wonder if we might have a different kind of conversation with EPSB at some point.
Yeah.
And one of the things that always interests me is the representation of knowledge within the disciplines and what is valued now versus what was valued when some of us went through the process. And so, I'm wondering if that, maybe we could talk to our colleagues on EPSB about the kind of conversation that they would like to have about how they can contribute to this from the perspective of their charge and their.
I think that's a good idea. Just for the board's information, Sharon and I and Todd have started meeting regularly with the chair, vice chair, and general counsel for the professional standards board. So just in an effort to coalesce our work in more intentional ways. So I think that's another angle that we should absolutely take a look at for the purposes of the committees.
Okay.
I'd say one thing to Randy's point, and really sharing tears too, but I hear you. And, when we went through this multiple times, and I know David and Karen have done this too, is that a lot of times people don't realize through the multiple times we've tried a lot of innovations, it wasn't even stopped at the state, and it was never an issue of folks not wanting to see change here. Where we were stopped in the past with former leadership at the federal level. So they've had turnover too, and I know David knew them all by name, especially when I first came on, is that we were stopped there. Because we are so reliant on federal dollars, because of the status of our states and socioeconomic status, is that it was a this or that. I sat at that table multiple times of them negotiating innovative changes to our assessment and what our superintendents at the time, and Randy, I think you were on LSEC at that time, well, what is happening, and I can tell you that the folks were sitting at the table advocating on behalf of Kentucky students, on behalf of the educators and the superintendents going, let us try this, let us do this. And sometimes it was a flat no. They've had turnover clearly, there's always turnover in those leadership roles and the vision changes. And so I'm hopeful. But, Sharon, you said it's warranted, is absolutely warranted. And a lot of times the work that goes on, and I think Kentucky has done a phenomenal job of always having stakeholders going, this is what we really want, and having at the table. And it's only become more and more robust in a good way of having people at the table saying, this is what we need, and this is reality. What we'd really like to see on measuring true learning and growth and opportunities. But truly, it was not because of former leadership shirking the responsibility. It was truly sometimes a decision on funding, title funding and federal funding of, if you do this, then you don't get this.
And those were real conversations that.
I hope nothing
that
I said
happened.
was an indictment of.
No.
Because, but shame on us if we don't go back.
No, I don't say that at all. I just want folks to know that this has been, I see where people are, because this has been very cyclical, and my hope of what I see is that you have a federal grant pursuing change and
They asked
innovation.
us.
And when the federal grant or federal agency asks for this and they promote grants and pay for this, it gives me more hope into the vision of what they're looking for, as opposed to a few years ago, it's if you're going to get this dollars for Race to the Top, then you have to do this. If you want this dollar, you have to do this. And then if you don't do this in your accountability, you don't get these funds or these funds. And that gets really dicey when our districts rely on that, our state relies on that, and it's a hard thing to navigate. So that's what I'm hearing that's so different. I see the difference in the state, but I also am encouraged with the difference at the federal level, because a lot of times those were our stops. And, we even had early on, we even had changes in the Secretary of Education happen overnight. And then we had a new secretary that said, oh, you got approved to do that? No, you're not going to do that. And that has literally changed in the dead of night. And so I'm encouraged, right? So no, Lou, it is not coming off on a defense. What I'm saying is just history. It's nice to see some adjustments. So history hopefully won't repeat itself, and I think Dr. Glass is right. We don't really know, but it's not to not pursue it. It's just in the past, it's not where people have just quit. It's literally been, we've kind of hit some walls in the past. And so it's encouraging for me to hear that it's a federal grant suggesting innovative thinking, not just from a couple really small states with lots and lots and lots of money, but other states, that have different demographics, that have other economic challenges. And so I just think context matters sometimes, and just to be a part of that cycle, and you all were too, in different roles. And it is frustrating, especially when you make the effort to bring people to the table. And I hear, Randy, we've brought people to the table for years, and that's why they question. And so I just, it's context.
And the support is there, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
As a district, we did those changes.
Yes.
I'm sorry, when I was there, and I'll say that, I said it publicly many times, I didn't care what the state assessment was.
You said it many
changes with David. We did the learning, and we did deeper learning, and the assessments, our assessment scores were great. I told them, don't worry about those. So somewhere along the line of, for the 8th time we're doing this now, that we get to the end of the road and we develop what we want to develop in Kentucky, and they say, no, we'll do the other assessment system. But we need to be out there supporting those districts that made a change and say, you know what, keep doing deeper learning. It's the right thing to do.
Right, it's a moral imperative.
Yeah. At the end of this. So at the end of this, I've sat so many at the end of these things, whether it was through LSAC meetings or chairing the things. At the 9th hour, okay, it was 4 years of work, a collaboration, all this great work, but then we were told not to do it. But there's those 8 or 9, that's your L3 schools, David's been there. And my thing is watching these two and you at the time doing great work, but then told you can't help them anymore. So I'm just saying, we gotta be committed that at the end of this, even if we have the same assessment, that we can't change the assessments because of it, we gotta sit here and say to these 2 people that's still on that table, instead of, you know what? Keep working with those schools, because it was this board leadership that said they were no longer allowed to work with districts. Our chief academic officer, or whatever performance title now, came to our districts and then was told that they couldn't come back because we're not going to continue with that. We got to move forward. So we've got to, that's all I'm saying. I support the work 1,000% over.
Oh, no, I know that. That is not a question. It's just true context of.
We've got to say we're committed and let those districts, and if it's a pirate system that we have to do 4 years from now, then have a pirate. Georgia has it.
Next time we.
I said,
John Silver's.
I think these 2 people have done such great work, and I just want to say, we want to see them to get through it this time.
Amen.
Thank you, Amanda.
All right, it's 4:15. How about
Usually-
15 whole minutes?
Okay.
Okay.
So, and again, I mentioned this before, at the heart of all this is deeper learning. Yes, if you really shift to that, you're gonna have to shift the way you assess students and the way you do all the rest of it. So up on the screen right now is a quote from some guy that came out of his recent article at Kentucky Teacher. I'm just gonna let you read it real quickly. And you finish reading and you turn your chair back around. I know. Sitting in the front row of the movie theater.
Watching you perform.
As I mentioned, we recently participated in a process where we had a deep 3-day conversation among KBE leadership about what is deeper learning. We could have that conversation for hours. But one of the things that we realized in that conversation was that one of the things that needs to happen as you really start to do this in schools is teachers need to be able to talk about it. They need to be able to say, I saw it. I saw it in this classroom. I'm doing it in my classroom. Did you see me do this? And so what we did in this activity is we watched this video of a group of students. And when we get done watching the video, I'm going to do this in a shorter way narrative because of our time constraint. I'm just going to do it as a full group. We'll do a conversation. But I want you to think about the quote from Dr. Glass. And as you watch this video, and I want you to ask yourself as you watch and as we finish up, and we're going to share a little bit afterwards. What did you see in this video? Did you see the things that Dr. Glass talks about in that book? Did you see deeper learning happening in this video? And to your point, Dr. Robinson, isn't that what we want every student in Kentucky to be participating in? Is those kinds of activities that take us beyond. I keep going back to what you said at a previous board meeting, Dr. Glass. Take us from learning the Pythagorean theorem to applying. There's deep learning. That's the difference. It's not just that I learned it, but what do I do with it once I learn it? So watch this video. Deeper learning?
I'll have that, please.
Very much so.
Absolutely. So Michael Bullen has been putting out this notion that we should stop saying, and I'm not going to confuse anybody, but deeper connotes the notion that it's deeper than something else. And instead, Michael says we should just call it deep learning. And that's certainly what I saw. And for me, deep learning is learning that matters to the learner and often to the larger world. So that mattered. Every kid sitting on the floor when they were reading the letter, when the teacher read the letter that they got the exhibit, every one of them, it mattered.
And when she said learning with our minds and heart, that just really spoke to me.
Yeah, and that back to that.
I loved that the conversation was generated from the children. They invested in their own learning.
And it ties into everything we've been talking about today about community, about building a hope for the future with communities, because the best projects are ones that tie all of that just like they did together. Do something in your community, not just learn the facts, but you embed it in your heart.
Well, the challenge that the commissioner gave to Superintendent Sunday night, Channel 9 Jason class. It's kind of scary. Was to find those in every school district, because there are we all know about those, the NASA astronaut project at Middlesboro. You had plenty of, we know about those. So find those, shine the light on those, and then respect the emergence of all of that great work. And then those lights begin going on. And those folks feel like it matters to my superintendent or my principal, not because of the test scores, because of the deep learning that my students are experiencing. So we know amazing teachers everywhere that are doing this kind
Well,
of
I'm
work.
gonna do my part. I just decided, Dr. Young, that I'm not gonna use that ER in that word anymore. It's probably too late at a corporate level
Yeah.
to get it.
Somebody's gonna tell me I've changed on them again. But it does resonate, doesn't
It
it?
does.
That is,
It's very much
it's
more,
deep
when you
learning.
say deep learning,
And that's an
What makes learning
individual,
deep?
visceral, personal experience.
can be placed on anything.
It's been quality instruction from day one, but what we did is we stopped doing some of those things that you saw there because we went back to the assessment.
Yeah.
And if we really do quality instruction, it doesn't matter what assessment we throw out there, it'll be there. But what we do is we take too long, and not to the ones that just gave us all those little standards on the board, but when we start taking the standard and start breaking it down, and then we worry too much of that in our teacher professional development, we stop doing what we saw
Well,
there.
teachers will tell you, I can unpack all the standards I just saw. I mean, they'll tell you, it's all in there.
And I like your
All of it.
deep learning, quality teaching or whatever, but you're right.
Yeah.
We have to support our teachers to take time to do that style learning. We don't necessarily do that anymore.
Teachers always deliver what you want them to do,
Yeah.
always.
Great. You inspire me, Dave. Seriously, I'm being serious about that. I think that, I feel that we're on the direction that we were 6 or 7 years ago. And, when we get there tomorrow, we'll do, the work that you used to help us do. And that'll be a question I ask of the other group, Mickey's group tomorrow is, are we really looking at those gaps and to see that this deep learning is making a difference in our economic gaps, our equity gaps, and all whatever gaps we want to call them? So are we breaking them down to those levels to make sure that the kid in Clay County, the kid in Boone County, Paducah, or whatever, are getting those experiences? And how do we replicate that and continue to replicate that over the board? Now, we saw some great examples at the conference yesterday from the co-op to the deeper learnings across the board. A lot of rich things, a lot of great things, but it was still limited to the schools that you're working with, David. And we've got to get past 10 to 20 school districts and have it in all 107.
That's why it's all about coherence. It's got to go together. Because if we don't do the things we're talking about with this grant, you're going to still have schools and districts and teachers that say, I got to worry about the test.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Anything else?
This morning, I got an email from the Walton Family Foundation. And it was an invitation, I don't know if I can do it yet, but it's an invitation to be part of a conversation that they're having in Washington in January. And the invited attendees include Education Trust, Walton Family Foundation, XLNet, and several civil rights groups, several parent groups, several business groups, Democrats for Education Forum, Fordham Institute. This is a list of entities that, when asked about could we change the assessment accountability systems five years ago, it not only would have been no, it would have been hell no, can't change them. The topic is changing the assessment accountability systems. So it's sometimes it does feel like the pace of change is glacial. It is. But something different is happening.
Yeah.
The fact that this group that I just listed off is willing to send people to get together to talk about how these systems might be different is significant. So it's happening right now.
Happening, people. All right, thank you, thank you. Brian, I won't use my sublime to the ridiculous joke. And that'd be just rude.
But you know she thought of it.
No.
Can you say it out loud?
It counts. Just joking you, Brian. So we've invited Brian to come back and just give us an update. A lot of things happening as we are on the eve of the short session coming up in January. So we really appreciate that Brian has kept us abreast of the developments through interim joint through the summer and then, thank you, Dave. And the processes that have been underway. So at this point, he's going to give us an update and
Sure.
take it away.
Thank you. I know I'm the last thing on the agenda, so we'll keep this brief. But I did want to give this a quick update because we're a month out. We're a month past the election, about a month out from the start of the session. So I just thought it'd be a good time to give you all a few quick updates. So in terms of the election results, the majority in both chambers expanded. So we'll see an 80-20 split in the House. And things aren't quite settled in the Senate yet, but I think they're going to go in with a 31-6 margin, with one seat being open with Senator McGarvey moving on to Congress. Then another seat should open up pretty quickly, as it appears that Senator Alvarado will be moving to Tennessee for a new opportunity there. So we'll see a total of, I think, 21 new faces in the House and eventually 8 in the Senate. If my math is right, that's right at 21% turnover in each chamber. Pretty much on par for the House, what we'd expect, but quite a bit higher in the Senate than we normally see. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how that shapes things going into the 23 session. Obviously, this is not in the election cycle. As you all know, we have a general election next year with the governor and the constitutional officers. The primary is May 16th. The general election will be November 7th. So we roll right out of one election and straight into another. And then, of course, at the end of the 23 session, we move straight into the next budget session, which just never ends. So we've also now started to see kind of how the leadership will look like in both chambers, and the majority leadership will look like for both chambers in the upcoming session. So I just wanted to give you a quick update on that. The Senate won't see any changes in their leadership. And in the House, Jason Nemus will replace Chad McCoy as Majority Whip. That'll be the only change for House leadership. So some nice stability there. In the last few days, we've also started to see the chairmanships or chairs announced. And so I just wanted to give you a quick update on that as well. So with the 2 A&R chairs, there won't be any change. So Representative Petrie and Senator McDaniel will continue in those roles. For education, we will have 2 new folks, although it's both very familiar names. So Representative Tipton will take over the Education Committee in the House, and Senator West will take over the Education Committee in the Senate. If you'll remember, those were the 2 co-sponsors of the Read to Achieve legislation from last session. 16. I was doing mixed up. As soon as I said that, I went wrong. Read to Succeed from last session. And both are also moving from budget review subcommittee chairs related to education. So both are really involved in the education world, very familiar with what we do. And so I'm excited to work with both those folks. Chair Wise will move from education over to economic development, tourism, and labor. So we'll still probably have some interactions there with that. Over in the House, Representative Weber will be the chair of economic development and workforce investment. And then the last 2 I wanted to mention are 2 budget review chairs. So the budget review chairs kind of help the A&R chairs understand what the budget priorities are for different entities. So there's 2 education folks. And we'll be working with Representative Banta and Senator-elect Matt Deneen, I think. He's out of Elizabethtown, so newly elected, will assume office in January. So that's kind of what the leadership is shaking out to look like. And then the 23 session will start January 3rd. They'll gavel out at the end of the first week. They'll take a break and come back on February 7th. And it'll be in session through March 30th, which is 90 days. So again, it's a short session, so we're not really expecting the budget to be opened, although as the commissioner has noted today, that's probably likely to happen to a small extent. But yeah, so lots of things happening. That's the very quick update, but I know it's the end of the day. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Question. That our vice chair brought up earlier is in the area of mental health. and so forth. And I think we've attacked it, and I want to ask your advocacy opinion. So we've attacked that by talking to the education committee. Do you think a better strategy would be talking to the health and welfare committees to get that as part of a community agenda versus just an educational agenda? Process.
So it's interesting you bring this up because there's kind of a big change happening right now. And that's that the health and welfare committees in both chambers are going to split. And they're going to become, let's make this right, health services and families and children in the Senate. And the idea being that one will focus on kind of the provider side and the other will focus on the client side. So that families and children committee could be a really good place to start this conversation. I also think there's a good chance that you see a school safety bill that the mental health aspect will be potentially addressed there as part of that initiative. So there's a few different options, but I do think that especially with the split now and kind of a move to focus the two committees, that it could be a good chance to put something forward to the families and children side. See if we can get a conversation started there. That's all I've got. I'll keep you all informed, obviously, as we begin the session and really get into the heart of things in February.
Thank you, Brian.
Sure.
Thanks, everyone, for your time and engagement this afternoon. It's a memorable meeting for sure. We will reconvene tomorrow morning here at 9 a.m. Eastern. But at this time, I'm open to a motion to adjourn. A motion from Mr. Trimble and a second from Dr. Poe. All those in favor, please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Feel better, Mr. Prairie?